or you will never have any peace of mind. Of course, the killing and avenging his mother's death will also lead him to never have peace of mind. We'll ask at 3B about you at the end of this lecture. When was the last time you were in this kind of a situation where there seemed to be no single right way? You know what I'm saying? No single right way to figure it out. Like, no matter what you do, damned if you do, damned if you don't, as they sometimes will say, right? Orestes continues. He says, he says it this way: slow, friendless, cursed of all should be mine end, and pitiless horror wind me for the grave. This spake the god, this dare I disobey? In other words, he asks it. Do you honestly think I would disobey the God who told me I had to do this or else? And then he finishes, for he, and he's talking about Aeschylus here, the man wears woman's heart, if not, soon shall he know, confronted by a man. In other words, Orestes says, I'm not just here for my mom. I'm here as well for that scumbag Aeschylus he wasn't even man enough to actually kill my dad. He let my mom do it, okay? Finally, Orestes then and Electra will gather around the tomb of Agamemnon, and they will then begin an invocation of a kind, and they will pray to Zeus for help. Orestes will say, Zeus, thou alone to us art parent now. Smite with rending blow upon their heads and bid the land be well. There seems to be a sense that Orestes is aware that, once he does this, things could go bad in Argos for all of them, right? I mean, it's like, maybe this could end up kind of being a dangerous thing, and so he asks for help. And then on to the end of this, he even says, grant me to thrust her, his mother's, life away, and I will dare to die. Sounding very much like Cassandra in the last play, the Agamemnon. Orestes will say it out loud, I am in fact ready to die. Electra will in fact pray similarly at the end. She says it, hear me, O Father, once again hear me. Lo, at thy tomb, 2 fledglings of thy brood, a man-child and a maid, hold them in truth, nor wipe them out. The last of Pelops' line. She mentions Pelops, who we've mentioned in earlier lectures, as Pelops was the one who was killed by his father Tantalos and served up to the gods, resurrected, and then had his own terrible existence. And while they live, thou livest from the dead. And then a really interesting line for Electra, children are memory's voices, and preserve the dead from wholly dying. And then an interesting simile, as a net is ever by the buoyant corks upheld, which save the flex mesh. It's interesting, a net would be used given the symbolism of the Agamemnon, right? In the depths submerged, listen, this wail of ours doth rise for thee, as thou heedest it thyself art saved. So Electra will then pray, I need help here. That's a fascinating line. Children are memory's voices. In other words, in some ways, you are an extension of the people who birthed you and who have raised you. And to that degree, we're hearkening then back to the curse of the house of Atreus. Electra seems to recognize that this killing of her mother is going to probably just promulgate more pain, more suffering, right? The chorus, right, will then speak about Clytemnestra's dream. She gave birth to a snake who bites her breast, drawing blood along with the milk. Obviously, this will be a key symbol for us, right? Orestes then will say, enough, let's get to the plan. The plan is that he is going to arrive with his friend as travelers. They are going to tell Clytemnestra, there's a rumor your son is dead. And in fact, Orestes calls his plan a net, like a net, right? And then, of course, Clytemnestra is going to act sad, and this is exactly what happens, right? We then have another one of those kind of characters. I told you that secondary characters were important in the Agamemnon, and they're also important in the libation bearers. We have Calissa, who's just a servant, but the nurse who raised Orestes when he was a child. This is, of course, going to remind us as well at the end of the Odyssey. You'll remember that Eurycleia, the nurse of Odysseus, will see him in disguise and immediately recognize, because of the scar on his leg, who he is. You'll remember that one. We have a similar kind of gig going on here. And Calissa, the nurse, will say it this way. about Clytemnestra. She put a sad face on before the servants to hide the smile inside her eyes. It's a beautiful line. In other words, Clytemnestra is an actress. Remember what we said in Greek language. The word for an actor is Hippocrates, hypocrite, right? Okay, and so she's good at it, right? She's good at it. And the chorus then will tell Calissa that the house of Aeschylus is come to the palace, and to have Aeschylus come to the palace quickly without bodyguards, that there is some important news. Orestes is dead, which is obviously news that Aeschylus would very much want to hear. The idea here, of course, is we're going to set up Aeschylus. He's going to show up without his bodyguard, and this will allow for him to be killed. And in fact, that's exactly how it unfolds, and Aeschylus does actually show up. Ready to hear the information, and of course we've got some dark irony in these lines. Listen to what he says. He says to the chorus, "I too will meet and test the messenger," right? Obviously Orestes. "Whether himself stood witness of the death or tells it merely from dim rumor learnt." And then he says this, "None shall cheat me whose soul hath watchful eyes." Now, of course, there's all kinds of dark irony here. No one's going to lie to me. No one's going to fool me. I'm going to make sure about this one. Well, Orestes, of course, will very quickly kill Aeschylus. He will scream off stage, "Help, help, alas," sounding very much, of course, like Agamemnon, who he helped to kill himself. And in the process, we then have the revenge part 1 taken care of, right? Clytemnestra is going to show up, and she obviously will be concerned about what's going on. And the slave will begin by saying, "Oh, woe, my lord is done to death. Woe, woe, and woe again. Aeschylus gone." To finish, notice that the slave will say, her neck, the queen's neck, hers is close upon the steel, and soon shall sink, hew through as justice wills. And then here comes Clytemnestra onto the stage, and she asks, "What ails thee, raising this ado for us?" And the slave will say, "I say the dead are come to slay the living." Clytemnestra says, "Alack, I read thy riddles all too clear. We slew by craft, and by like craft shall die." She knows she's going to die, right? "Swift," she says, "bring the axe that slew my lord of old. I'll know anon or death or victory. So stands the curse, so I confront it here." Notice, so stands the curse. In other words, she says, I knew this was coming. It was just a matter of time. Get me the axe that I jacked my husband with. I'm going to go down swinging. Some have seen Clytemnestra, the fighter to the end. And yet, we have kind of an interesting then exchange that starts to happen here between son and daughter. And of course, very quickly, Orestes shows up, right, his sword dripping with the blood of Aeschylus, and he says, "Thee too I seek, for him who's done will serve." And Clytemnestra will say, "Oh, Aeschylus, spouse and champion slain." Orestes says, "What? Lovest the man? Then in his grave lie down, be his in death, desert him nevermore." In other words, "Oh, so you really love Aeschylus? Oh, I can make that. I can make the two of you live together as lovers. Here, I'm about to kill you and lay you down right next to him." Clytemnestra, however, is smart. So she's going to use a form of rhetoric that just about works on Orestes. She says, "Stay, child, and fear to strike. O son, this breast pillowed thine head full oft, while drowsed with sleep, thy toothless mouth drew mother's milk from thee." Now, the idea, of course, of the breast and the milk take us back to Clytemnestra's terrible dreams that she's been having about the snake. But notice her logic here. It is, hey, who carried you for 9 months and birthed you and then took care of you in those early months of your life, when if I didn't take care of you, you would have died. You cannot kill your own mother. We are kin. Now you want to write this down because this is huge, because in the third play, The Furies, we're going to come back to this question and this argument about what is the relationship between a mother and a son. Are they in fact truly kin? Now, of course, some of you are already like raising your eyes like, what are you talking about? Are they kin? Are you kidding me? Of course a mother and a son are kin. Well, we're going to come back to it at the very end of this Orestes trilogy. It's at this point, Orestes is a little bit unsure, right? And he says, can I, my mother, spare? Speak, Pylades. And he asks his friend. Now, his friend hasn't said anything throughout the entire play. This is the only time that really Pylades gets any kind of stage time, and Pylades will say it. Where then would fall the hest Apollo gave? At Delphi, where the solemn compact sworn. Choose thou the hate of all men, not of gods. Whoa! So in other words, here we are, back again with that notion that, hey, Apollo told you, you have to do what you got to do. So don't wimp out on me at this point. You're going to have to do this. Orestes says, thou dost prevail, I hold thy counsel good. And it's at this point then that Orestes will lead Clytemnestra off stage to get ready to kill her. Now, it's fascinating, the exchange before they leave. So let's pay some attention to it. He says to Clytemnestra, follow. I will slay thee at his side, Aeschylus, with him whom in life thou lovest more than Agamemnon. In other words, you took better care of him than you did my dad. Sleep in death. The meed for hate were love, and love where hate was due. In other words, you're getting what you deserved. You love the wrong man. She says it again. I nurse thee young. Must I forgo mine eld? In other words, you can't kill the very woman that took care of you. Orestes says, and this is the interesting exchange argument. Listen to it. Thou slewest my father. Shalt thou dwell with me? In other words, you kill my dad. I can't let that go. No, no, no. That's just not the way it works. By the way, notice, there isn't any mentioning here for Orestes about, well, it is true, my dad, I guess, killed my sister Iphigenia, and that was a really crummy thing. None of that, right? It's a very simple one-to-one correlation. You killed my dad, I am obligated to avenge the death of my father, right? Okay? Clytemnestra will come back and say, fate bore a share in these things, O my child. Orestes comes back with, fate also doth provide this doom for thee. Now the fact that she would go there, fate, in other words, it was fated, I didn't have a choice, is ironic on a number of counts, isn't it? I mean, you can jot down on your own the ways in which that's ironic. She says, I really didn't have a choice in the matter. And of course, you can imagine that he's going to come back and say, well, I really don't have a choice in the matter either. Fate, what is determined versus what is free will to choose? This is, of course, a central question of the Orestes. Clytemnestra will come back, beware, my child, a parent's dying curse. Orestes comes back to say, a parent who did cast me out to ill. In other words, oh really? Now all of a sudden you're going to say you're my mom who cares about me? You sent me into exile, into banishment. Clytemnestra says, not cast thee out, but to a friendly home. In other words, now she's going to try to recreate the idea that she sent him away and never actually took care of him. Orestes says, born free I was by twofold bargain sold. In other words, you were no mother to me. Where then, Clytemnestra asks, where then the price that I received for thee? Oh, really? If I sold you, then where did I get the money for that, right? The price, Orestes says, oh, shame, I taunt thee not more plainly. Clytemnestra will respond, nay, but recount thy father's lewdness too. Notice how Mama is jumping to different kinds of arguments. Wait. Before you kill me, think about this. You're killing me because I killed your old man, but hey, your old man was a lewd guy. I mean, he messed around himself. I mean, remember these rumors about what happened with Chryses and the fight with Achilles over a girl, and then there was a whole thing with he showed up with Cassandra, for crying out loud, right? Orestes says, homekeeping. Chide not him who toils without. Now this is a very sexist line. In other words, women are supposed to take care of the home. They should not be messing around with other men. And Clytemnestra gives a line that has often been studied and talked about. She says, it's hard for wives to live as widows, child. In other words, while your dad was away fighting at the walls of Troy for 10 years, what was I supposed to do? What, wash the dishes every day? What, are you kidding me? In other words, this is her argument. Orestes comes back. The absent husband toils for them at home. Clytemnestra responds, thou growest fain to slay thy mother, child. In other words, she says, I can tell that you're not going to do this. And Orestes says, nay, 'tis thyself wilt slay thyself, not I. Now this is interesting logic. Because you can tell, Orestes has been told by the god Apollo, this is what you got to do. Orestes is a little bit uncomfortable about doing this, you can tell it. He's kind of, convincing himself, I got to do this, I got to do this. Much like Hamlet. You remember the last lines of Hamlet Act 1, "O cursed spite, that ever I was born to set it right"? You get the sense that Orestes, he's not a killer, right? And he's not a kid who has spent a lot of time in battle fighting and killing. So this doesn't come natural to him. And Mama can tell that he's starting to kind of waver a little bit. And yet it will be Orestes who says, I'm really not killing you, you're killing yourself. When you made the choices that you made, you set this whole project up for your death. Clytemnestra goes to her last line of argument. Beware thy mother's vengeful hounds from hell. There it is. In other words, it's this question. It's the question of Shakespeare's Macbeth when we talk about Macbeth, and especially Lady Macbeth, right? You can do it, but can you live with yourself after you've done it? In the play Macbeth, it's killing Duncan, of course. And here, obviously, it's going to be, can you kill your mother? And then can you live with it? Because there's going to be tremendous guilt that you're going to feel, the hounds from hell. Orestes says, how shall I escape my fathers, sparing thee? In other words, Orestes just says it out loud. This is, again, the Scylla Charybdis problem. In other words, if I let you live, the hounds of hell from my father will haunt me for the rest of my life. I don't have a choice here, right? Living, she says, I cry as to a tomb unheard. That's Clytemnestra's line, and of course libation bearers comes to mind here. She wouldn't go to Agamemnon's tomb to pour libations, but now she will begin to talk about the libations of her tears and all of that. Orestes says, my father's fate ordains this doom for thee. And Clytemnestra then will come back full circle with the powerful imagery. And again, I'm reading all these lines to point out the genius of the language. Clytemnestra's final words are these. She says, ah me, this snake it was I bore and nursed. And there it is, right? The realization is that the dream she's been having is the very thing that's about to happen. Orestes, her son, is the snake. Orestes will say, ah, right prophetic was thy visioned fear, shameful thy deed was, die the death of shame. And he drives his mother off stage to kill her. Then Orestes, with his sword and the robe that she used to kill his father, will appear. Obviously, these are powerful symbols at 2b, right? And just like Clytemnestra, at the end of the killing of the Agamemnon, plays a very similar kind of game. Orestes now has done the deed. The end of the play is living with doing of the deed. And he says several things as he's standing there. He begins by saying, there lies our country's twofold tyranny, my father's slayers, spoilers of my home. Erstwhile they royal sitting on the throne, and loving are they yet their common fate. He also says it this way, though. Then let him stand when need shall be to me, witness that justly I have sought and slain my mother. Blameless was Aegisthus' doom. He died the death law bids adulterers die. But she who plotted this accursed thing to slay her lord, by whom she bare beneath her girdle once the burden of her babes, beloved erewhile, now turned to hateful foes. What deem ye of her? Or what venomed thing, snake or adder, had more power than she to poison with a touch the flesh unscarred? Notice the genius of Aeschylus' language. The inversion of the symbol. Orestes says, I'm not the snake. The snake, the adder, the sea serpent is in fact my mother. Notice the word justly gets used here. In other words, I killed her. Well, this sounds a whole lot like the end of the Agamemnon when Clytemnestra was saying the exact same thing to the chorus. I killed him, and it was the right thing to do. Here, I killed her, and Aegisthus, it was the right thing to do. It was the just thing to do, right? Orestes will finish the play by recognizing that soon madness is coming. And in fact, we will have this madness that starts to show up. He even says it, look, look, alas, handmaidens, see what Gorgon shapes throng up, dusky their robes. Interesting that robes get used, given, of course, the use of the word robes. netting, right, in the earlier play. And all their hair enwound, snakes coiled with snakes. Off, I must away. In other words, he thinks he begins to see what is actually coming, the Furies. Now, in Greek mythology, if you kill your parent, then you will be haunted by the Furies. These women, these horrifically scary women who are going to come after you. Now, we don't see these Furies or these women here in this play. We will in the third play. We don't see them here. But Orestes does. Orestes sees these already, and he's beginning to get kind of freaked out, and he's ready to run off. The chorus will try to tell him not to fear. He will say it. These are no dreams, void shapes of haunting ill, but clear to sight my mother's hellhounds come. Right? And then to finish, Orestes says, O King Apollo, see they swarm and throng, black blood of hatred dripping from their eyes. Brilliant word pictures going on here, right? And the chorus will say at the very end of the play, the only hope now you have is to go back to Delphi to be purified there at Apollo's, with Apollo's oracle. And the play then will end with 2 more murders, right? And a mad person, a madman, right? Okay? Which leads obviously to some questions, right? Can Orestes live with what he's done? And of course, do you think this is going to end the eye for an eye personal vengeance? We have a sense to think probably not. Okay, well that's the end of the play. Let's work at level 2 now quickly. How about themes? Well, obviously we've got the theme of revenge continuing here. But the question again is, can Orestes live with the fact that he has killed his own mother, right? Which leads us to the second major theme of the play, and it really is this theme of justice. Now we're going to get into this in its fullest instantiation in the third play, The Furies, here in a bit. But, I mean, let's just think about that question of justice for a moment. Is it right for a son to avenge his father's death by killing